Yeah, Palingana. This is our place. Our ancestors have been here since the beginning of time. We come from this country. We are a part of it, not outside of it. Our responsibility is to maintain the balance of relational ecosystems that we all live in. We are country, seas and waterways. Some call me water, nearly all need me. I touch everything, connecting the inanimate with living things that without me would not be. For in all of the arteries and all of the veins, I am the flow of life. We are country. Country is us.
Hello everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Palawa and the Muinina people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Fiona Sweet. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Stella Prize, and we're really honoured and thrilled to be here in Hobart for our second ever Stella Day out. So thank you so much for welcoming us and for being such a wonderful crowd. Our second session today is Nothing Bad Ever Happens Here, with the 2027 Stella Prize winner Heather Rose and award-winning author Danielle Wood. Heather Rose is the author of 9 novels and a memoir. The Museum of Modern Love won the Stella Prize in 2017, the Christina Steed Prize and the Margaret Scott Prize. Her novel Bruni won the ABIA 2020 General Fiction Book of the Year and is currently in production as a 6-part TV series. Rose's latest book is the memoir Nothing Bad Ever Happens Here. Danielle Wood is the author of the Vogel Prize-winning novel The Alphabet of Light and Dark, Rosie Little's Cautionary Tales for Girls, Housewife Superstar, The Very Best of Marjorie Bly, and Mother's Grimm. With Rose, she is Angelica Banks, author of the Tuesday McGillicuddy Books for Children. She's also the co-editor of 2 anthologies, Deep South, Stories from Tasmania, and Island Story, Tasmania in Object and Text. Welcome to you both. We're thrilled to have you here. And just a little bit of housekeeping, mobile phones off, of course. And at the end of the session, our wonderful new ambassador, Anna Reynolds, will give a speech as well. There'll be no Q&As in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thanks everyone for coming. I think Fiona has just done the declaration for us that probably needed to be done, that we do actually know each other quite well, having in fact written 3 books together. But Heather has gracefully allowed me to direct traffic for this session. And I thought what we might do, what you might find interesting, is a bit of a retrospective of Heather's career, because she has written so many books now, and so many books that are so different. You might be wondering, how does the same mind produce such diverse work? So how about we find out? So Heather, I would like to start with the hypothesis that a writer like yourself, who immerses herself so deeply in each book, that each project is going to match up with a very particular period of your life, with a feeling or an atmosphere in a period of your life. It certainly seems that way for me watching from the outside. So when you think back to your very first book now, White Heart, which is the only one you wrote before we knew each other, what were the prevailing atmospheric conditions for you as a writer back then?
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, everyone. It's so lovely to be here in Hobart with you, and especially as part of the Stella, which makes such an extraordinary contribution to women writers in this country. Oh, White Heart. I was determined to finish a novel, like actually write it to completion. I'd actually written 2 novels before. I wrote one when I was 21, which was a story, a correspondence between a daughter and a father when the daughter was in Greece. The second book I wrote in my mid-20s, and it was set in Colorado, and it featured a woman who was a fish by night and a woman by day. But the story was really about the man who was rebuilding a house in Colorado. I was writing that one and trying to unravel myself from copywriting, because I had worked for a long time in advertising as a copywriter, and copywriting is all about brevity. It's all about every word counts. And when you do a headline, you do the body copy, and by the end of the body copy, people latch onto the brand at the bottom of the page. And that's what matters. You have to get them through to the brand. So it was like unpicking very tight knitting. And Danielle is a spectacular knitter, and I'm not. So it was really difficult to unpick myself from that craft and expand into character and into plot and into the flow, the sort of mysterious flow of a novel. And I moved into a house and discovered only after I moved in that I was living next door to a very famous writer. And I had no particular contact with them, but I thought, but I could watch, I could observe, I wonder what happens, I wonder how they do it. And my bedroom window looked into their backyard, and there were 4 windows along the side of the house. And at that time, I had 2 children, so I would start work at 9 o'clock at night. And, two or 3 nights a week, I'd start work at 9 and I'd work till midnight or something, and this is how the novel was progressing. But I would go to bed at like midnight, and the light in one of those rooms was always on, and I could see the back of a computer. And I thought, oh, he writes at night too. Okay, good. All right. And so the next night I'd write till 1 o'clock and the light was still on, and then I began writing till 2 and 3 in the morning, and I got more flow because I was giving myself a longer period of time to immerse myself in the book, in the story, and in the language and in the craft, And the most amazing thing was this light was always on. This person worked much harder than I did, and I was really compelled by this. I was like, wow, okay, that's what it takes to be a writer, clearly, And so you can imagine how sleep deprived I became and all of that. But nevertheless, the book got finished, and the book went off to an agent. A friend of mine said, I've just been rejected by this agent, but you might be lucky, which didn't seem like a very good recommendation. And I was lucky because this particular agent, I had no idea, had a fascination with Southwest Tasmania, had walked in Southwest Tasmania, and she's also of Native American descent. And I could never have known that, but she picked up the book. The book got picked up by Louise Thurtell, which was at Transworld at that time, and the book got published. And then I was in that process of the book about to come out, and I had taken 2 of the children from next door with my 2 children off to go tadpoling at a friend's dam up under the mountain. And we were up to our knees and nearly our waists in muddy dam water, and we had sort of stockings on coat hangers, and we're trying to catch tadpoles. And one of the girls says, we tried to turn tadpoles into frogs last year. Someone told us that if you leave the light on all night, they think it's sunshine and they'll... But it wasn't true. They died. And I remember standing in the dam water going, oh. But it got me going, and it got me there, and the book got published, and it was book number 1, and it felt so extraordinary to have that. I remember when it arrived, and it's in a post pack, and pulling it out and sitting on the front steps in the sunshine and pulling it out of this post pack and just thinking, oh, okay, I did my first one. That's good.
So the transformation didn't work on the tadpoles to the frogs, but it did work on Whiteheart.
Yes.
Which I read sitting in a hammock in one day in Broome in northwest of Australia. So I borrowed it from the Broome Library when I was very homesick, and that's probably where we actually really met.
Yes, because Danielle and I have a mutual friend, and he said to both of us, you've got to meet each other. And we ended up going for a walk on the beach. And
so that came next. He said actually that we should play Scrabble with each other, which we haven't done that much of, really.
She's really good at Scrabble. You don't want to play, Danielle. She's really good at it.
This is how I end up with no Scrabble players.
She knows all the 2-letter words.
Anyway, what I remember next what came after White Heart was the period that you were writing Butterfly Man. And later in my life, I would come to look back on this period in your life and go, oh, that's where Heather was. So you had young children, you were trying to write your second novel, and the only way to get it done in the midst of all the working and all the things was to hire a little place up on Mount Wellington and run away from your family periodically. And I lived in Mount Wellington at that time, so I would walk along the pipeline track and occasionally drop in and visit for kind of writerly chats. So Butterfly Man, that's how that was written. But what do you remember about the feeling of the Butterfly Man period of your life?
It took about 6 years, and that whole fight with Forestry Tasmania came in the midst of that. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have to put the book aside. I'll give her a year for the trees. I'm going to put the book aside. And then, of course, I picked it back up again. And sometimes we live in circumstances that make writing impossible in the houses that we live in, and I really recommend that you find yourself a studio if that's the case, if you don't have a supportive environment at home. And I took this little house, as Danielle said, and I had a baby girl at that stage, and so 2 boys and the girl, and I would take her, she was tiny, so I would take her with me and she would go to sleep to the sound of me typing. That was her melody for sleep. And then we'd walk the mountain, and the boys had come up, and I'd take them all on walks on the mountain because I knew it was really important to capture the mountain somehow. My dad, who's here today, is a great mountain walker, and I knew that if I wanted to really travel through the seasons of a man's dying, it felt very appropriate to mirror that with the seasons on the mountain. And if you live on the mountain, and I'm sure some of you do, and I know Danielle has, and I have too, it's a very particular world up there, and it's a magical world of change. There's always change evolving because nature is so close to us. So I loved immersing myself up there, and my recollections of the delights of walking with the children will stay with me forever. We made our own pathways up the mountain, and we followed the old pipeline, and we found an old fridge that had been laid down sideways. And when we found it, it was quite grown over with moss and everything. And we'd go up, we'd go, let's go to the fridge. And we'd walk up there, and then we'd always approach it with great trepidation. And, we'd be like, do you think there's a body in there today? And we'd imagine all the things that could be in there, and then we'd lift the lid and everyone would scream. But of course, it's just full of dark, mossy water. But it was always such fun. And we played so much on the mountain during the writing of that book. But I was also living with a kind of recollection of being much younger. I was 21 and I'd moved to London. I'd been away for a couple of years, and I moved to London to sort of make money so I could keep travelling for another couple of years. And I went to work for a lord and lady in Surrey. Lady Droider had Alzheimer's disease, and I was her companion by day. But of course, once my work finished, Lord Droider thought that this was a spectacular moment in his life because there was this little Pygmalion from Tasmania, and she didn't know anything about opera, and she didn't know anything about wine. And he could introduce me to people, and I would tell them travel stories, and he used to find this very fascinating. And so I got it's the wrong word to use these days. The word that comes to mind is groomed, but it wasn't that kind of grooming, but it was a grooming. It was an insight into peerage and the privilege and the entitlement. And so when I started writing The Butterfly Man, I was actually very, very unwell for a number of months with arthritis, and I couldn't get out of bed for a long period of time. And he came to me sort of through the miasma of opium, and legally prescribed, let me say, morphine. And it was a really dark time in my life.
When you say he, you mean your main character?
Yeah, my main character, yes, Lord Lucan. But I didn't know that it was Lord Lucan. He just came to me with really unreliable stories. He was the classic unreliable narrator. And after I got well, I started to write the stories down, and I went out to dinner with Lindsay Simpson, who some of you might know. And she was an investigative journalist for a long time, Lindsay, and I told her about this character that kept telling me different stories, and she said, it sounds like Lord Lucan. And so I went back and I said to him, you know, my next writing session, Lord Lucan, and then the book really expanded and I got that first scene where Suki arrives with Charlie, and the book flowed on from there, and the mountain flowed through its seasons, and somehow or other, over 6 years, I got it done. But it was a book where I had to fight every day to claim myself as a writer, to say, this is what I want, this is my career. It's not running an advertising agency, and it's, I love being in service to my community. I love being in service to my family, but there's something bigger for me that I really want to do, and I want to be a writer, and a writer writes, and a writer writes books. And so it was hard. It was really hard. I knew this would happen. You see, I get too open with her.
I bear witness to how hard it was. And, you know, years later I would watch, you know, when I had my own young children trying to have a job and a writing career, and know that exactly where Heather was at that time. And I do remember calling into the little A-frame writing studio, and sometimes when she got there, the first thing she would need to do was sleep. She just need to sleep. And then when she woke up from the big long sleep, then she could start to write. I remember that very powerfully. Do you want to give people the Weet-Bix packet version of what The Butterfly Man is about, just for people who might not know about Lord Lucan?
Oh, well, he in 1974, he was estranged from his wife, and there was a nanny looking after the children in the house with the wife, and the nanny was murdered on the stairs going down into the kitchen. This is in West 1. It's just around the corner from Buckingham Palace. He disappeared that night. There was an inquest. He was found guilty of murder in his absence, but of course he never went to trial because he disappeared. No one's ever seen him since, verifiably seen him since. So it was a great mystery. And it was a strange book because I didn't do the research at the start because I know what a rabbit hole that is. I'll be down there forever. So I did the research at the end, and the strange things that I'd actually got right, like the name of his brother and the fact that he was potentially seen in Zambia. And there was just really, it was a strange confluence. I don't know if Lord Lucan is even still alive. It's possible. He's exactly the same age as my dad, actually, and Dad's still here, which is great. So it's possible he's still alive, or, you know, something happened. I don't understand the imagination, but well, he was a good character to live with, and I was very sad to leave him at the end. I really had to let him go. He'd become all my characters do become quite vivid in my life.
They certainly do, and imagination is a good way to get on the bridge to the next book, which is possibly something of an outlier in Heather's repertoire, because while the rest, other than our children's books, they're also kind of in the world of fantasy. Most of Heather's books are grounded in what we would generally accept as reality, but not The River Wife. The River Wife is different. The River Wife has a devoted following, but it's not one of Heather's big books, but the people who love it passionately. And when I think about The River Wife, I think of trees that suddenly stand up and turn into people. And I think of Lake St. Clair and mythology and strangeness. So when you look back on that book, were you going out on a limb, or were you delving deep into yourself?
Possibly both. And it wouldn't be here without Danielle, that book, because I had The Butterfly Man talking to me, and I had The River Wife talking to me. She came to me just in the days after I gave birth to my daughter. She was basically born with asthma, and so the only way I could have her go to sleep was to sit upright with her on me as a tiny baby, and that went on for months. So you can imagine my sleeplessness was quite extreme, and that's where that story came from. But someone said, you can't write a novel with only 2 characters. And I remember thinking, I don't know about that. I could try. And so, and even though there is, as you say, there are some other characters that are non-human, I like the challenge of both doing a book in 2 characters, but also of trying to find language when a person hadn't had a classical education in any way. In fact, her father had tried very hard not to educate her, but to let her be what she was, which is a forest creature, a creature of the water and a creature of the forest. And so it was incredibly hard, to the craft of that book, to try and make it believable, and also to bring her to life in a way that was also born of mythology and born of fairy stories. And Danielle, you're an expert at that. There's a certain narrative trope that we understand in those stories. But quite recently, my beloved partner asked me if I would read The River Wife to him, and we got about halfway through and he had to go away for work. And I was just starting to get a very disturbing feeling about halfway through. So I finished reading it myself while he was away, and I actually had no idea how sad it was. I was devastated by it. I was like, I didn't know that. Of course I knew it within the characters, but to me now I see it in myself. So I was both out on a limb, but delving deeply. I just hadn't quite understood how deeply I was delving.
So the Museum of Modern Love. That seems to me like a child that I knew that grew up. So it had different names at different times. I remember when I think it was called Things I Never Said, or was it Things I Never Told You?
No, it was Things I Never Said.
Things I Never Said.
Remembered. Yeah.
And then later it was The Atrium. That book evolved and shifted over the 11 years that you worked on it. 11 years. What is it like to watch a book develop over that span? What is it like to be making a book develop over that span?
Looking back, actually, as you characterise it that way, I'm thinking of Marina Abramović herself and her endurance. She's a spectacular performance artist of endurance. And she herself is deeply inspired by performance artists who also understand and work with endurance. It was an endurance, that novel. I mean, I nearly gave it up so many times. And, you can imagine I'm telling my agent that I'm writing a book about a somewhat unknown Serbian performance artist, and she's like, really, Heather? Really? I mean, The Butterfly Man's very good. You couldn't follow on from that. River Wife, do you want to do something else like that? No, I had to write that book. And then, of course, we wrote our series in between those 11 years. I don't think it's very easy to understand the complexity of the craft of writing a novel unless you've actually tried to write one and completed it. It's a difficult process in so many ways because the characters, for me, characters just arrive. They just show up. I get a scene in my head and they are speaking and I'm writing it down. It's like having a radio station playing in my head and to some extent a movie playing in my head. So I'm drawn by the characters, and in order to know them, I need to go back and look at what they can tell me about their past and what they might tell me about how they feel about food and love and sex and, culture and art and nature, all these things that I need to know about them, what happened in their childhood, what were their parents like. So I write hundreds of thousands of words to get the backstory of my characters, and sometimes that ends up just being 2 pieces of dialogue, just someone says that and someone says that. And it's worth it for that because I know that that's truthful to them as a character, but it's time consuming. And it wasn't until I learned to work with Danielle that I learned a little bit more, control over that, I think, and some precision. But the challenge of the book was extreme. I started out being inspired, as some of you might know, by a piece of Marina's art. It was a photograph of her piece called Rhythm Zero, which was the one in the gallery with the 72 items, a whip, a rose, a bottle of oil, bread, 72 things that the audience was invited to use or inflict upon her through the 6 hours of this performance in Italy back in 1974 74 or 76, I think. So there were chains, there was a gun, and there was also a bullet. So they nearly killed her. And this was written as a little blurb under the photograph at the National Gallery in Victoria. And I remember looking at this picture, and then I read below that, and it said Marina Abramovich is also known for a piece where she walked the Great Walk of China, the Great Wall of China. It's called the Great Walk. And she started at one end of the Great Wall, and her partner Ulay started at the other, and they met in the middle to say goodbye to each other. It was their completion. It was intended as a walk where they would meet in the middle and be married, but it took so long to get the authority to do this from the Chinese government that their relationship had collapsed by then. So they did it anyway, and did it as a saying goodbye, a ceremony. And I thought, who does those things? Who has 72 items on a table and allows the audience to do whatever they like? But it's so romantic that they have to create a ceremony of such grandeur to say goodbye to the man they love. And I thought, oh, there's a character for a novel. And so I made a fictional version of her, and I worked with that for a long time. But then I went to sit with Marina in the Museum of Modern Art in New York during The Artist is Present. And I thought, oh, I can't fictionalise her. She's too powerful. Her work was so extraordinary in that gallery space, in the atrium of the gallery. The way it was affecting people was the most extraordinary thing for me. People would sit and they would just start crying, and she's witnessing them, and she's not responding, but she's present. The artist is present, and the witness was present. It was exquisite to watch that, and to have children run into the atrium and just be stilled, and then they would practice. They'd sit opposite each other and get into eye contact, and that got me. And I thought, okay, I can't fictionalise her. And that was when the overarching narrator, the kind of muse, came in, and all the other bits and pieces. So it was an endurance, and I had no idea that it would become the book it's become.
So here's another thing I remember about the Museum of Modern Love period. I remember quite a lot about it because it went for a long time. But I do remember us catching up one day, and you were deep in reading about the deep past history of Serbia. And that was not uncommon for you to be reading something that might have seemed tangential to the book, but it was part of the deep research that you felt like you needed to do. And I think people are often surprised. I know Kath Scholes is here, and Kath is another deep researcher. Kath reads enormously widely and finds out everything she can, and people are often surprised by her level of research too. I think people are very taken by the idea that we novelists make stuff up, but in truth, we have to have stuff to make that stuff out of. So tell me about the research that you do and that you did for the Museum of Modern Love.
Well, yes, the history of the Balkan Peninsula, the history of women in art, just a small subject. I had to do the history of film music and understand what Archie would be likely thinking. So I watched an enormous number of interviews and with film composers. I listened only to film music while I was writing that book. I obviously researched New York. I researched architecture because of Lydia. And of course, when I had a fictional version of Marina, I had created those pieces that later become Lydia's works of art, her architectural works. So that was very helpful. But I did a lot of work on researching women architects. I can't remember all the others. The history of the Hudson, the history of New York City. Germany. There's her curator, the German curator who looks after her. I went to meet with him, actually the guy he's based on. I went to meet with him to ask permission for Marina to maybe appear as herself in the novel. There were so many little things, so many huge subjects to try and get my head around And Mona here was spectacular. Mary, at the librarian, was spectacular because David had a collection of Marina's works and every book that had been written on her. So I literally sat in a cupboard at the old warehouse before Mona was even a museum, and worked in the cupboard reading every book that had ever been written about Marina. It was long, went on. Don't take me back there anymore.
So because we are here at the Stella Day Out, we should talk about the extraordinary impact that winning the Stella Prize had on your career as a writer, and what an incredible recognition it was for all those 11 long years of working on the Museum of Modern Love and not giving up at those points where it felt really hard. The Stella Prize, what was it like to win it?
I had one of those classic moments where you see it happen in movies, but it doesn't seem believable. The person tells you on the phone that something has happened and you can't speak. Your mouth is moving, but no sound is coming out. I couldn't believe it. I was sure another book was going to win. It never occurred to me that I would win with the Museum of Modern Love. I was amazed to be even longlisted. And then the public recognition and the expansion of readership and the time. We got a 3-week residency, and that's where I got to Bruni. I mean, I wrote the significant draft of Bruni and finished it there. And I remember there was a gardener on that property, and he'd drop around every now and again and make sure everything was all right. But I was sitting outside working on something, and he came by and he said, "Oh, it's very lonely being a writer, isn't it?" I said, "You have no idea, there's hundreds of people in that room in there."
Well, thank you, Fiona, for the Stella Prize, and to all the other people behind the Stella Prize. It is a shining light for writers and readers in Australia. So during those 11 years of writing the Museum of Modern Love, you were doing something else. You were being one half of Angelica Banks, and I was being the other half. It seems quite a long time ago now that we wrote a trilogy of books for children. You were talking about the fact that you read The River Wife and you realised how sad it was. You also told me that when you reread Finding Serendipity, you realised how incredibly crazy it is. So perhaps that happens when two writers write a book together. But when you look back at that collaboration, those 3 children's novels, what would you tell us now? What didn't we know back then that we know now?
I think you taught me a lot of courage. I think there was, Danielle is a doctor of writing. She's studied writing. She's a pedant for beautiful grammar and beautiful sentence construction. And I say that with the greatest affection and respect, let me say.
I didn't take it as an insult.
Some people might be concerned that I use that word, but I love that about you.
Oh, no, proud pedant.
proud pedant, yeah. And so there was a lot I learned about the science of writing, and that was such a gift. And we went about it initially chapter by chapter. I'd write one, she'd write the next. And then this mystical, magical thing happened where we would be able to finish each other's sentences, and then we'd edit into it. And we had this extraordinary collaboration, and we agreed, Danielle created this rule that if either one of us was not happy, it wasn't good enough yet. We hadn't got there. So I remember we wrote one chapter 17 times or something until we got there. And it was, we wrote the first one, and I think even maybe the second one, and we were shortlisted for some fantasy awards. And I said to Danielle, "But it's not fantasy. They're not fantasy." And she goes, "Heather, the writer floats out the window and goes to the land of story." And I said, "But we do that every day." It was a spectacular gift in my life. I mean, you had the twins. So Danielle had twins, newly arrived twins. I had 3 children and a complex life. And it was escape, wasn't it? We used to have so much fun. We would laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh.
So that rule that if we both weren't happy, we weren't done yet, we had to write another draft, that was a real handhold as we went on. We did a lot of trips to schools, and we'd ask the kids, and we'd actually turn up in costume as Serendipity Smith. So we would be wearing long red wigs and blue coats, and we could actually manage to look slightly alike. And then we would, take off the wigs and the coats, and the kids would realise we were actually two different people. But we would ask them, do you think we fight when we write books? And they would all say, yes, we think you fight. But the reality is we never fought, because we just had that rule that if we weren't both happy, we would write it again. So are you exhausted yet? You've written White Heart, you've written Butterfly Man, you've written The River Wife, Museum of Modern Love, Finding Serendipity, A Week Without Tuesday, Blueberry Pancakes Forever. But oh no, you're not tired, you're on fire. You're going to blow things up with that creative power. Enter Bruni. Another departure, another genre. How did that happen?
Oh, I got cross. Yeah. I got cross. I was at a conference, because I was a businesswoman. I was invited to a conference at West Point Casino. There was a very prominent world leader there, a very large international contingency of guests, and it seemed like Tasmania was for sale. Everything was for sale. Our meat, our wool, our pastures, our water, our salmon, well, not the salmon so much, but our aquaculture. It just seemed like everything was for sale. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I remember writing some essays about it, but it all sounded very preachy and ranty, and I didn't like the tone. So I just set it aside. I think it was while we were in the midst of the children's series. And of course, I hadn't finished Museum of Modern Love yet. And I thought, maybe after that book, I'll write something about Tasmania. And I was walking the beach one day at Kingston, and I looked, and from the end of Kingston Beach, from the end of the Dog Beach, if you look down the Derwent River, you can see North Bruni and the tip of Tinderbox. And there was this strange cloud structure across it, and it looked like a bridge. And I thought, oh, that's funny. I wonder what it would be like if there was a bridge to Bruni. And almost instantly, Astrid turned up in my head, and she was at Hobart Airport, and she was meeting someone who was clearly family. They seemed to be sisters. And, Astrid looked like this sort of world traveller with a sort of, khaki outfit and her sort of, metal suitcases. And then these two got in the car together and travelled home. And I met the brother, and I realised that the brother was the Premier and the sister was the Leader of the Opposition. And this sister had come in to try and settle things down after something had happened. And I remember I saw, I often see the end of the story not very long after I get the beginning. And I saw the end, and it was all these billboards and election placards blown about, like some wild storm had come through and just wrecked everything. And I thought, okay, so these three have some kind of strange relationship. And at the end, there's a kind of chaos. I wonder what happens in the meantime. And that's when I saw the scene where the bridge is blown up. And I thought, oh, that seems dramatic. So I had to go and find people who knew about engineering and bridge construction and
explosives.
Oh yes, I did. I reached out to a friend of mine who's ex-military and asked him if he would put me in contact with someone who knew about how you could blow up a bridge. And and by then I had all the metrics. I actually based it on the Brooklyn. It's a third, I think it's, no, maybe an eighth. It's an eighth bigger than the Brooklyn Bridge, something like that. I had to recalculate the dimensions of the Brooklyn Bridge to get it right, because I knew it would make a difference to a bomb analyst, and what the K-zones, it's true though, and what the K-zones would be and how it ought to work. And so I put all this in an email to this person who shall forever remain unnamed, and asked him if he could help. About 2 weeks later, I get back this extraordinary email with like 3 pages of exactly what it would take to blow up that bridge. But what so amused me, it was an attachment, but the email itself to the man in the middle said, I take it this is a fictional scenario. It's fantastic.
So by now in your career, you had written literary fiction, children's fiction, the crossover novel that is Bruni. So what will you do next? You'll swerve again. And this time, a memoir. And it's the one you have in front of you there. Nothing bad ever happens here. Now, a memoir is not something I've ever tackled. What's it like?
I don't recommend it. It was awful. It was really an awful process. I didn't like it. It was, one starts with the idea that you can somehow grapple with a sense of self at various ages in the past. Yeah, that, oh, yes, I can just go revisit my 7-year-old self, and then I'll revisit my 11-year-old self. But in order to do that with any integrity and authenticity, I had to really go back there. And so instead of being visited by characters, I actually had to go and visit the character of myself. And that was so painful a lot of the time. I didn't realize what a strange little creature I'd been, and, how impacted I'd been by certain, I sort of knew that at many levels, but to visit myself again. And also, having written so many books, I knew that readers would expect me to write that as well as I wrote Museum of Modern Love or Bruni. They would expect a similar level of competence in the writing. And this was my first attempt at doing nonfiction, so the craft of it was also really difficult. So not only did I have to go back and revisit things that were very painful, and also things I hadn't given a great deal of thought to for a long time, I had to find the craft of nonfiction. And you know what that's like. It's impossible. Yeah, you do that so well, but it's a very different form to fiction. And it was a very emotional process. I cried a lot. I didn't like it. I didn't like doing it, and I'm so glad it's done. And I would have given it up along the way if it hadn't been for great enthusiasm from publishers and my agent. But it was a sense of completion in a way. I think it has made me feel that I have actually put the past to rest in a way that I hadn't expected. There was certainly a freedom that's come beyond it, and that was unexpected. But then, of course, one has to go out on the road and talk about it, and that also was re-traumatizing every time. So I've had to really corral the questions that I'll accept about the memoir now, because it doesn't, for all of you who have, and I'm sure there's many in the room, traumatic things in the past, telling them doesn't heal them.
I'm wondering if you would do us the honour, Heather, of reading us a little bit from the memoir. I'm wondering, there's a short piece towards the end. It's called Dolphins. Do you reckon you could read that for us?
This edition that I have here is my dad's. I borrowed it from him because I didn't bring one with me. And you can see he reads it and makes these beautiful, puts these notes in it. This piece is called Human, and there's a poem by my dear friend Tina Christensen, who's here in the room and is a spectacular poet. And this particular piece says, "The sacred is everywhere. We need only to remember to look with sacred eyes." I added a word, I'm sorry. "The sacred is everywhere. We need only remember to look with sacred eyes." In the cold waters of the River Derwent, I swim through late winter and into spring in nothing but bathers. In the water, I am just another aquatic creature, akin to whale and dolphin, who must also rise to breathe. Today, the sea is milky Prussian blue. Other days, it's the green invitation of Tharlo blue. I rarely miss a day. It's my gift to my future self, all this swimming. I watch women in their 60s, 70s and 80s come down to the beach through the frosty months. On days when there is snow on the mountain, the sky is cloudless and the sun is warm away from the wind. One woman, who may be in her 90s, puts out a plastic chair and drapes her towel over it. She swims in bathers and a cap, emerging some 20 minutes later as radiant as a sea goddess. Two other women breaststroke slowly 1/2 kilometre and back, chatting and laughing. When I do it myself, brave the cold, brave it almost every day. I walk in up to my waist. I trail my hands in the water. My brain says, you've got to be joking. It lists every reason not to do this crazy thing. But then I go in. At first, electricity shoots up my arms. My breath seesaws. There is no putting my head under, no freestyle. The air is too cold for wet hair and the water stings my face. I kick on my back. I breaststroke with care. I surrender my limbs and become swaying kelp. This is another sort of dance and I must learn the steps. After 10 minutes or so, something strange starts to happen. The shock departs. I can sense the chill against the outer layer of skin, but my organs are not cold. My body feels enlivened, as if this elixir of sea and sky is a balancing tonic, a healing force field of mysterious potential. The cold has taught me a certain fearlessness. I procrastinate less, I need less, I'm more grateful, I live more simply. Sometimes the beach is closed because the sewage plant upstream has had another spill. My parents ate fish from this enormous river, but no one has done that for years now. Too many heavy metals. As a child, I ate shellfish off the rocks and drank from rivers and lakes with no fear of contamination. When we fished, we never took more than we needed for a meal or two. Our 21st century bodies are soft, but we are hard on this planet. All we discard fills the land. All we pour away flows into the sea. Comfort is killing us. Disconnection too. I am an ocean swimmer, a coast dweller. My home is just 70 centimetres above the sea. The rhythms we've relied upon, the life we feel entitled to, it is all less certain.
Thank you. So, Heather, swerving away from your books for a minute, a double-barreled question, and it's not a small one.
Never is with you, Danielle.
As a writer, what for you makes an idea compelling enough that you want to transform it into a novel? And as a reader, what makes for a compelling book?
Oh, such a good question. And it's just occurred to me, it's character in both. In both, it's character. You know, when a character arrives and they take you by the hand and they say, here I am living on a mountain, or here I am trying to grapple with the, you know, my wife has gone off to a clinic and I'm left alone to write music, or, you know, here I am alone and my father is no longer in human form and I'm left alone in this forest, and now suddenly a man has come through in a way that no human ever has into my world. They grab me and they talk to me and they take me with them. And I think that's the same when I think back about the books I love. It's always the characters that stay with me. I mean, the craft is very important, of course, and there's so much craft in the creation of character and what we learn about character, isn't there? But yeah, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I'm interested that you were able to answer the question so incredibly swiftly.
It just
character.
I couldn't believe it.
Which is brilliant. I might have had to sit here like a goldfish for a little bit longer ago. I think that in addition to character, I'm also very interested in structure.
Oh, great.
Oh, great. This might give you a little clue into why we write well together. We are so different in the ways we write. Heather will write an enormous volume of work and then throw out everything and end up with the bit she wants to keep. And I write slowly. And by the time I've finished that same amount that Heather's written, you know, it will have taken just as long, but it'll be finished. So we're really, really different writers that way. But I think I have some of the books I really admire are books that do very, very clever things with structure, that, you know, start you somewhere and bring you back to a different place, or take you on a particular kind of journey. And when I'm writing, I often use my hands. I'll put the microphone down to show you. And what I mean when I'm saying that to myself is you're sculpting with emotion. So one emotion has to follow another, has to follow another. Is this right? Is this the right thing to follow the next thing to follow the next thing? So that's just how I think about it.
That's so great, because I do music instead. I'm always listening for the musicality of the novel. And so that's true for me. I think character, but also voice, which is what are the beats that this person, I mean, this is why I love Cormac McCarthy so much. And I just read Suttree, and it's one of the only ones I haven't read. And I was blown away by it. It was so beautiful.
So I think I know you well enough to nominate some of your favourite novels. I know that The Old Man and the Sea blew your mind when you were very young. Thank you, Kevin, for taking her to the library and getting her to read The Old Man and the Sea when she was so very young. The Hobbit made a massive impression on you. I know you read Anna Karenina from time to time to revisit it. If you haven't done that, I really recommend it. You may find that it's no longer Anna's story at all, but someone else's. But a book that you and I both love that you recommended to me is a book that you might not pick immediately as a book that you would love, and that's Never Let Me Go, because it doesn't have so many of the things that you might think of in a beautiful book. It doesn't have the beautiful poetic language, and yet it is one of the most compelling books.
Kathy, I know, I'll never forget her name. Yeah. Kazuo, though, he's so brilliant.
And you recently recommended The Bee Sting to me, so it's on my groaning bedside table now. So what about those books, Heather, those characters? Tell me about your relationship with those.
I recently moved and the removalist congratulated me that he had never, ever, in all his many years of removing people from one location to the other, had so many boxes of books. But you know they were all named, of course I do alphabetical, but I'd also had, stacks of books and one of the boxes, we also won the award for the most fascinating thing written on the box for the removalist. And he'd been removing people for 35 years or something. He's such a lovely man, and he just laughed and laughed and laughed, and Evan refused to let me tell him what this was all about, but he just loved it. It said Tuesdays and pancakes. In this box are Tuesdays and pancakes. He was so delighted by that. But it was all the extra stock that Danielle and I have accumulated over the years. So,
The Hobbit. Tell me about The Hobbit. Why did The Hobbit blow your mind as a wee one?
Because it transported me entirely to another world that was both familiar but delightful. And the narrative, of course, when I read it, I didn't realise it's such a beautiful story of the hero. It's the classic heroic journey and return. I loved Bilbo. I loved Smaug. I was in love with the world. I thought JRR had just made a magical place for me to visit whenever I wanted to. And of course, then it darkens once we get to The Lord of the Rings. But yeah, those books were, my best friend and I at the time when we were 9, we read The Lord of the Rings and we were so captivated by it. It was, I still read it regularly, and I read it to my children out loud. I can't believe I did that 3 times, but I did, because it's so important to understand narrative. I think it helps us understand the human condition.
So I have 2 more questions because I am watching the time.
Yes.
So I remember you telling me once upon a time that a quote from the German writer Thomas Mann resonated with you, and he said, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people." Now, something that resonated with me at a deep level as a writer is something Helen Garner said after she finished her first novel, Monkey Grip. After she finished it, she thought, excellent, now I know how to write a novel. But then when she started her second novel, which I think was Cosmo Cosmolito, she realised that all she had learned was how to write Monkey Grip. So for each novel, we are beginners again. So the Thomas Mann quote, a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. Does it still resonate for you?
Every day. Every day. I mean, I'm grappling with an edit at the moment of my next novel, and it's so hard because you unpick something and then, of course, you have to go back and remember that for the other 120,000 words that you unpicked this one piece. And, you know, you've helped me so much in learning that fastidiousness of craft that's required for a really good outcome. It bears down on me all the time, the complexity of what I'm trying to do and the difficulty. And perhaps if I had a bigger brain, it would be easier, but I just have an ordinary brain, and it just has to stretch out all the time into parts and places that I have no understanding of. And this particular new book is I decided I'd do historical fiction. So I'm back in, between 1790 and 1850 in Europe, and then in Tasmania. Is partly drawn from family history and partly from a story someone told me. And I've had to grapple with, I went actually all the way back into the 1600s so I could understand why the 1700s had this amazing explosion in thought about the human condition and what are we and why are we, and, all the great questions that the French philosophers started to ask. And then why was there a revolution? What was happening that this carried. I wanted to understand the context, of course. So there was all that context in Europe, and then there was the colonial context and British government and British policy and slavery, and there's just been so many parts to that time that are fascinating, and all of those impact the characters in the book in some way or other, because that's the time they're living in. Just like for us right now, the things that we're living in, post-COVID, environmental collapse, all those things are affecting us, and they would be affecting characters if we created them at this time. So it just felt so important to revisit the past as much as I could and get a worldview, and then be able to write with some authenticity about how people from France or people from England would be thinking about the world, and how they felt about religion, and how they felt about women, the role of women, and how we felt about education, all these things that have come into it. It's been very hard, and I've loved it, but there's no job more difficult.
I'm going to ask one more question, but before I do, I'll just let all of you know that if you had burning questions for Heather, you can probably ask them if you're getting her to sign a book for you. So the book's for sale outside. I saw Bruni out there. I saw Whiteheart. Nothing bad ever happens here. The Butterfly Mans, they're all out there. So I'm going to ask one more question, and I think that when we get to the end of that answer, I think we're done. So you can feel free to applaud and for that to be the end of the session.
Well, then can I say before we do that, thank you. It's been wonderful. I had no idea how interesting that process would be. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome, my love. All right. So can you please now, to end our session, can you get us excited about your next novel? What is it about?
Well, as I said, I've dived back into Europe in 1790 onwards. I am descended from a man who, the story in my family that I grew up with was that his parents were beheaded in the French Revolution. He then went to England, had a family, and and his daughters emigrated to Tasmania back in the late 1830s. I also was told a story by a famous person who lives in Tasmania, renowned for his craft. He told me a story about that particular craft, and I waited for about 10 years until I actually had time and space to consider that as my next novel. I rang him up, went up and had lunch, and he had done all this research for me, and he handed it all to me, and I started going through it when I got home, and I realised that this particular thing had happened basically right next door to where my grandmother's great-grandmother had first settled in Tasmania. And I got goosebumps, and I thought, oh, I could bring these two things together, which is, of course, the fiction. And that's where I'm working at the moment, in the fiction of if she played some part in this story that is a true story about Tasmania, but no one knows it. So I'm very excited to share it. Thank you all.
Well, thank you both very much, Heather and Danielle. It was very honest and very courageous conversation, and I think all of us really, really enjoyed that very much. It's our final session for the day, for Stella Day Out, and I wanted to thank Emmett and Greg and everyone at the University of Tasmania and the Theatre Royal, and our gratitude goes to you for helping us deliver this event. So I think a little bit of a round of applause for them. So since 2012, Stella has elevated the voices of women and non-binary writers. Through the annual Stella Prize and the Stella Count, it has changed the literary landscape, opening necessary conversations about gender and books. But there's so much work that still needs to be done, whether we know the long list, the short list, or the winner announcements, and they help to increase book sales, as Heather has just attested to. We also aim to help women and non-binary writers find the time and the space to write through our residency programs and now through Stella Day Out. And we hope we can continue to promote their books, have networking opportunities, and share the love of books Australia-wide. We're trying to make sure that these voices reach as many classrooms, offices, homes and corners of Australia as possible. It's only really by reading, sharing and talking about books that we can create a truly more equitable space where all voices matter. Ambitious? Yes, we know it's quite ambitious, but we can only try. That is why later in the year we'll announce more Stella Day Out dates across Australia. The 2024 Stella Prize longlist announcement will be on the 4th of March at the Adelaide Writers' Week, so we hope some of you can come across to Adelaide for that. The shortlist announcement will be on the 4th of April in Sydney, and the winner will be announced on the 2nd of May in Melbourne at the State Library of Victoria. Please mark these dates in your calendars and join us in celebrating the most excellent, original and engaging books of the year. And now I'd like to welcome Stella's newest ambassador, Councillor Anna Reynolds. Councillor Reynolds is the Lord Mayor of Hobart, and her work was fundamental to ensure the designation of Hobart as the UNESCO City of Literature. Thank you, Anna. I don't know if it's working.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this this lovely event, and I do feel like it's a very hard act to follow. That was such a delightful and natural conversation between the two of you, and you're very, very much respected writers in our little Hobart community. But I guess what I can try and do is be a little bit of a full stop on the afternoon by just talking a bit about a few things here in Hobart. I do often wonder what it is about Hobart that incubates good writers. Perhaps it is the presence of Kunyanyi Mount Wellington looming large above us that makes us think big. Or perhaps it's our proximity to a globally significant place such as Antarctica and our role as custodians for its protection. Perhaps it's our isolation. We're a step or two away from many centres of writing and culture. And so we've learned to develop our own styles, our own ways of expression, our unique voice. Perhaps it's our writing and reading culture has been helped along by our long, dark winter nights. Or perhaps it's our rich and interesting literary history as I think Australia's first city of writers, readers and publishers that inspires us. I am very proud of that Hobart's cultural history and love of literature has been recognised recently by the United Nations Cultural Organisation UNESCO with the declaration of Hobart as a city of literature in October 2023. Hobart joins 53 very interesting cities globally in 39 countries who are part of this UNESCO Cities of Literature network. And it's an extraordinary achievement for Hobart to attract this global recognition and reflective of the importance, I think, that writing, reading and storytelling has to the people and culture of Hobart. So as Fiona mentioned, I was part of the City of Literature working group that pulled together the nomination in a few months, very busy months working together last year. And Cassandra from Tas Writers is here, was another member of the working group. I'm not sure if anyone else from the working group is here. We were a very eclectic group of writers, booksellers, arts organisation and library administrators, a mayor, working together to get a nomination in. And I think the Hobart writing and reading community is really proud of this recent designation, and we all hope that it will bring that increased awareness of Hobart's literary history and its thriving contemporary culture of writers and readers. We do have a remarkable story to tell, and women have been central to it from the very beginning. Hobart was at the forefront of writing in Australia. In 1818, the first work of general literature in Australia was published here in Hobart. 2 further novels were written in these early years by Mary Lehman Grimstone, and she completed Louisa Egerton on arriving in Hobart, and then she also wrote Women's Love before returning to Britain in 1829. And where we're sitting today, the Theatre Royal, or close to the Theatre Royal, has been a hub of local playwriting and storytelling since 1837, and it's the oldest continuing theatre in the country. And during the 1840s, this theatre was managed by Anne Clark, who was the first female theatre director in Australian history. And she is known to have raised the standard of the performances at the Theatre Royal, and among her many achievements, produced Australia's first performance of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. Sadly, though, not everyone in our community is able to share in our literary culture equally, with around 50% of Tasmanians who are functionally illiterate. And for these Tasmanians, the opportunities to engage with our stories and to indeed tell their own stories is limited. And so we do miss out on these voices and these experiences and this untapped potential. I think you'll all agree that Hobart is a city of contrasts. It's filled with many great writers, brimming with avid readers like yourselves, but it's also surrounded by many that do not or cannot read. And the declaration of Hobart as a UNESCO City of Literature provides us an opportunity to fix this. And it was certainly a central theme that in our nomination that we would be working not just on the celebration of writers and readers, but also working to kind of build the culture of storytelling into some of the initiatives. So the nomination outlined 6 initiatives. I won't go into all of them today, but just one of them was around building storytelling communities and doing more, working together on initiatives like Tasmania Reads Week, which is coming up. The second one's coming up later in March. Another initiative in the action plan recognises that we need to support writers and content creators by providing more opportunities. And so as part of the initiative, there will be a new hub for the Tasmanian Writers Centre in the State Library. There'll also be a new City of Literature sponsored PhD, thanks to UTAS, and a poet in residence, thanks to Fuller's Bookshop. Another initiative seeks to connect readers and writers in shared spaces like libraries and bookshops to bring Hobart's literature to its community. And as part of this, I'm hoping to open a little micro library at Town Hall. It'll be the Town Hall Library. And of course, in a few years, we're hoping to all be wowed by David Walsh's new library out at Mona. So libraries are a big theme that we're hoping to do things on. So I encourage everyone here today to participate in any way or every way you can to the City of Literature initiative. The success of it will be driven by the power of your words and your ideas and everyone's willingness and enthusiasm to partner with each other and to make things happen. There is no rule book for exactly what a City of Literature does. It's really about whether people want to use that kind of enthusiasm and pulling power of working together under that banner to do new things and to really enhance what we have. And so that just brings us neatly to where we are here today. Obviously, the Stella Prize and events like today are really vital for building community support to women and non-binary writers. And we are really thrilled that you are here in Hobart and you're bringing your initiatives here so that we can all connect with the amazing Stella Prize and the work that you do. I think it's 12 authors longlisted in the 2023 prize, 6 authors shortlisted in that prize. And I've got some figures here that do what was just being talked about the that how the boost in sales if you're on the long list is 17% following the announcement of being on the long list, and on average an 80% boost in sales in the week after the announcement if you're on the short list. So these are Mike, but that's okay. I think you can hear me. I first became aware of the Stella Prize several years ago through my dear friend Fiona Stager. For those of you who know Fiona, she owns the Avid Reader bookshop in Brisbane, has done for 30 years, and I've known her for 30 years. She is a more avid reader than myself, and she certainly told me about the importance of the Stella Prize and was an early supporter and one of the first judges. Stella believes that storytelling and reading are essential tools by which we understand ourselves and we foster connections with others and learn about the world around us. And so I really look forward to helping in whatever way I can as a Stella ambassador here in Hobart. I don't do enough reading for pleasure these days. But reading has been central to my personal developments. It's allowed me to build my expertise, understand the world, to be inspired and to reflect and grow emotionally. And as I have got older, reading books, I have stuck with books. I haven't gone on to any other technologies. Reading books for pleasure is a special escape from the reading and writing that I do for work, which is often sort of skimming and trying to sort of quickly assess information in the role as mayor. But writing is also a powerful way to tackle the issues of our age. And it's something that I probably do more often than I do reading. I'm writing about things all the time, many issues. And things like climate change is something that I do a lot of work on, and it is a complex and challenging theme to deal with. So I think that was one of the themes also that Stella was interested in my work in that space, and how the creative process of short stories has the power to raise awareness about climate change and make our way of dealing with the impacts and dealing with solutions more relatable and hopefully more inspiring, so we can get more done. So thank you all for being part of this today. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thanks again to everyone at Stella for organising it today, and thanks to our 2 wonderful writers in conversation. And have a good afternoon, have a good weekend. Thanks, everyone.